Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, who finished 3-9 last season. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with a spring game on April 27th. We have a special guest joining us today. They are the authority on Louisiana Tech Athletics. You can catch them on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Central on Sports Talk 97.7. He is a Louisiana Tech alum and a former baseball player. He's also the owner and publisher of BleedTechBlue. He is Ben Carlisle. He can be found at BleedTechBlue on X. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, and excited to talk some Louisiana Tech football tonight.
All right, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, and they had some changes on the defensive staff in the offseason. Defensive coordinator Scott Power was relieved of his duties. In comes Jeremiah Johnson. He was previously the defensive coordinator at Northern Iowa. Last year, they ran a 4-3 scheme, but what style of defense can we expect to see here from Coach Johnson in 2024?
Yeah, I think it'll be multiple. I think in the spring we saw mainly a 3-3-5 look. I don't know. You know, you look at Tech's issues defensively under Scott Power, they really struggle to stop the run. And so, you have to imagine that opponents are going to come in with a game plan, at least early in the year, that they want to establish the run game to see if Louisiana Tech can slow them down. And I say that to get to the point of you run a 3-3-5. I don't know that Tech has a true nose on this defensive side of the ball. Travell Vivian's was signed in the offseason from a junior college. He possibly could. Kels Bush transferred from LSU last year. But I just don't know. Zion Nason is more of a true 4-3 tackle. Same goes for some of the other guys in there. So all in all, I think they want to run a 3-3-5, but I think ultimately what you see and what you hear from Jeremiah Johnson is he's going to run a defense that best fits his personnel. And I think that's what we really saw in the spring. And, guys, I'll be honest with you. Like in the spring, they were borderline dominant. And I don't know if it was because the offense was so far behind. I don't know if it's because it's a new defensive scheme. Guys are being allowed to play a little bit more free with a little bit more pace. I don't know if they got just so much more talent on that side of the ball, but they were really, really impressive this spring.
Well, let's move on to that talent that'll be running Coach Johnson's defense. Let's start with the guys up front on that defensive line. Deshaun Hall Jr. and Rasan Williams II will be tough losses. They've both graduated, but there's a nice core group of guys coming back like Mikel Clark and Zion Nason, among others. How did that unit look this spring, and did anyone stand out to you?
I don't know that I would necessarily say that anyone stood out. Here's the thing. You got to go all the way back to 2020. The last time a Louisiana Tech defensive lineman's had more than 5 sacks. Now, and that's a different regime. Obviously, that's Skip Holtz and that's Sonny Comby. It's just been very difficult for Louisiana Tech to get pressure on the quarterback the last 4 or 5 years or so. And listen, if you're running a 3-3-5 scheme, I think a lot of your D-line play is going to be predicated on getting penetration, allowing some of your linebackers behind you to make plays. Like you mentioned, Michael Clark, he's been rock solid. I think you know what you're getting from him. He's not going to be a guy that's going to go out and get 8 or 9 sacks. He's not going to have 12, 13 tackles for loss, but he can play an end spot. He can cause some havoc at different times throughout the year. You mentioned a guy like Zion Nason. David Blake came in from a junior college Division II school, Westchester, last year. I think both those guys have progressed nicely. I think the next step in their, progression in their career is, can you go from a 4 or 5 TFL guy to a guy that's 10 or 11 TFL? I think that's the next step in terms of not only for themselves individually, but that's creating a better defense, just causing more havoc in the backfield. And I think at another end spot, Jane Burnett was a guy that he was off to a tremendous start in 2023 before he suffered a knee injury to shut him down for the year. He was back this spring. He looks bigger. He looks explosive. He probably didn't get recruited by the Power Fives because he's a 6'1" end. That's just not necessarily what they're looking for. But I think all in all, a lot like the offense, the defensive line has a lot to prove because it's not any different at Louisiana Tech than it might be anywhere else in the country. But if your defensive line's not creating pressure, the trickle down effect is tough to overcome on the back end.
Absolutely. So moving over to the linebackers, that group's going to look a little bit different here in 2024. They lose their top two tacklers from a year ago. Brevin Randall transferred to UTSA, and the leading tackler, Gisler Boateng, has graduated, but they do return Zach Zymos and others. And then they brought in a host of guys in the transfer portal. What can you tell us about this room and who you think is going to step up here in 2024?
Yeah, you mentioned the 3-3-5. I think the guy in the middle of that defense is probably going to be Colby Fields. Started his career at South Carolina, spent a year at LSU, came to Louisiana Tech last year. I think we all remember football players had to end up sitting on a second-time transfer. He was one of the unfortunate casualties of that. So he's back on the field. I think he's the best player on the defense. I think he might be the best defensive player in the conference. And I know that seems bold to say, but it's elite athleticism. If you want to knock him a little bit, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but it's elite athleticism. He flies to the football. Just one of those guys that makes plays and causes turnovers. You mentioned Zach Zymos. He had a really good year coming in from Arkansas. I don't know that Tech fans or even the coaching staff necessarily knew what to expect. I think the next step for him is just becoming even more physical than you were a season ago, and allowing yourself to take that next step in your career. And then they also added a guy, Pitt Cage. He was a freshman All-American at Nicholls State back in 2021. He's been at LSU. He's been at UTSA. He'll probably play some nickel. He'll play some linebacker as well. I think he's a lot like Colby Fields in the fact that maybe slightly undersized, but he's just a guy that always finds himself around the football. And when you're looking to improve a defense like Jeremiah Johnson's trying to do and really trying to flip the script in 1 year, you got to have guys that go out there and make plays and find the football.
Well, Fields might get that 1 year back because the recent ruling. Yeah, so that's the NCAA does a lot of stupid things, but that's one thing that our affiliate definitely got it right. So
yeah, no doubt.
All right, moving over to the defensive backfield, they also have some key losses, graduating Miles Hurd, Cecil Singleton Jr., and Conference USA All-Conference first-teamer Willie Roberts. This room is highlighted by the return of guys like Cedric Woods, DeMarcus Griffin-Taylor, and last year's freshman standout Michael Richard. How did this unit look in the spring, and did anyone stand out?
I'll say this. They looked improved, especially at the safety spot. I think they had to add more speed to that safety spot. Michael Richard, you mentioned, he's a freshman All-American. He's moved back to more of a traditional safety spot. He played in the nickel last year. It's just as a guy that was trying to refine some technique stuff as a young freshman. And I think he looked really good this spring. You mentioned Cedric Woods. I think they're going to lean on him a lot, as being that older guy in the room. You look at the last couple of years, Tech hasn't necessarily struggled to defend the pass, and it's because they've been really good at the corner position with Willie Roberts and Miles Brooks, both guys that got a chance in the NFL. So I think DeMarcus Griffin-Taylor has to transition into a guy that not only stays healthy, but he's got to be able to play a cornerback spot. Roderick Robertson, is a transfer from SMU last year. He's a big physical safety that likes to get downhill. They signed Jordan Miles, a JUCO transfer, to help out at a corner spot. Isaiah McIlvain, I thought he had one of the better springs at a safety spot. He was a reserve safety after coming over from San Diego State last year. There's so many names in this group. B.J. Blake was a JUCO transfer signee. Jordan Morgan comes in from UNLV, was really good at UNLV in 22, didn't play in 2023. What do you get from him in 2024? So I say that all to say this. Like, I thought the DB room looked really much improved. There's obviously a lot of new faces back there, but they look like a talented group. And then I think most importantly at the safety spot, they got faster. And it's not only a group that can become physical and come downhill and hit you. They can run with a tight end. They can run with a slot guy more effectively now.
No, obviously, it's a new coach and potentially a new scheme here. But last season we saw Miles Hurd be a very effective tackler there from his safety spot. Is there someone else that you see kind of filling in that role, or with the new defense, maybe that role doesn't exist anymore?
Yeah, I think that would probably be the best way to describe it. I think obviously you want a guy that can get downhill and fill gaps, especially in the run game. But I don't know that. I don't know that Jeremiah Johnson necessarily asked his safeties to come down and be so physical. If there was a guy, it'd be Blake Thompson, transfer from Iowa State, played 140 snaps over 6 games a season ago. There was some really good production. But I think for the most part, it's probably Michael Richard. It's probably Isaiah McIlvain, 2 traditional safeties that kind of roam center field, can go sideline to sideline. Another name I want to mention that I failed to mention earlier, Jamal Shelby's a redshirt sophomore corner. He was a reserve role a season ago. I mentioned a guy like Colby Fields, how I think he can be one of the best defender or one of the best defensive players in the conference. I think Jamal Shelby has more NFL talent than probably anyone on this roster. He's 6'2", he's 190. There were some question marks coming out of high school. Can he play corner? Is he more of a safety? He's a true corner. We know what it looks like in the NFL. They're looking for tall, long guys that can play the position. I'm excited to see what he looks like in 2024.
All right. If you have to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who are you picking?
For me, it's no question. It's Colby Fields. I think he's a guy that could end up with triple-digit tackles in the spring game. Obviously you're not tackling the quarterback. He probably had 3 or 4 sacks. I think he's a guy, like I said earlier, he's going to force turnovers. I'll say this. If Tech's defense makes a gigantic improvement in 2024, he's not going to be the sole reason, but he's going to be the main reason from his playmaking ability. I think it's vitally important that they keep him healthy throughout the year.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Fight, fight, fight for red and blue. Show your might and we'll root for you. Get on your toes and you meet your foes and don't let them break through.